Hey crew, it's Pit, and I'm back with some more Socrates. Today we're going to be diving back into the works of Plato, and we are talking about Timaeus again. I probably should have put this first part onto the other one, but I didn't, so we're going to go through it, and then we will get into the next major subject uh, afterwards. But we're going to talk now about the island of Atlantis. Y'all got to pardon me, I broke my glasses earlier, so I have to wing it, but we talked about Atlantis, and let's look at Google Earth where we were talking about, right? I said that I believe that Atlantis was a large place about the size of the entire subduction zone right here, right? It was a large landmass prior to the last flip. And then when the flip happened, everything went under. It was all subducted at the same time when the bulge had to realign. And so uh, it, it's as big as Africa and Asia. Let's talk about those divisions real quick because Egypt was basically half of this yellow part, right? Egypt went half this line this way, and then the other half was Libya. It was this way over here, and that was Africa to the left, and it was Asia to the right. So when it says as big as Africa and Asia, that's what it's talking about. Egypt was pretty much Asia, and Africa was pretty much Algeria now, but it was Libya then. And so that is the size that we're looking at here. So now let's talk about it. Okay. Now this island of Atlantis is a great and wonderful kingly power was established which ruled the entire island, many other islands, and part of the continent. Now it's unclear whether that is the continent on the other side or the continent on this side. It seems to be the continent on the other side because it says this. And what's more, even within the straits, they ruled Africa as far as Egypt and Europe as far as Tuscany. This entire kingdom once wait, well, let's look at the geography again, right? So when it says Africa, it is talking about half of this yellow, the western half of this yellow, up to Egypt, which is where Asia for them begins, right? You had the Asia, you had the Orient was over here, and like they had a different classification. And when it says Europe up to Tuscany, Tuscany is up in this area here, about halfway through Europe, like all the way. It's Spain, the better part of France, most of Rome, like most of Italy, like a good chunk of Italy anyway. And Athens is over here by itself in this underwater position, like Greece and all of this. We'll talk about this again in a little while, but this is the Pillar of Hercules right here at the Straits of Gibraltar, and let's go from there. And this entire kingdom once constituted itself as one united force and tried in single onslaught to enslave your land and ours. And indeed, the entire territory inside the strait. Solon, it was then that the power of your city shone forth before all mankind in excellence and strength, as she stood preeminent over all, in nobility of spirit as well as skill in military affairs. At first, she led the forces of the Greeks, but then, when all of the others had deserted her, she stood alone, facing extreme danger, and triumphed over the invaders and set up a monument. She saved from slavery those who had not yet been enslaved. As for the others who dwell inside the pillar of Heracles, she freed them all ungrudgingly. So, the attack was launched by Atlantis outside of the pillars with everybody on the island. Now, there's 10 kingdoms over there that we haven't got to yet, but there are 10 kingdoms on this island who act as a unified force in their attempt is to take over everything from halfway through here to the east, where the division of the land has been made. One of these entities has control here-ish, and one has control over here-ish, according to some other books. These things all do line up eventually. And then sometime later, after she has freed all of the slaves, there was a huge earthquake and a deluge. And there came a single grievous day and night in which your entire warrior class was suddenly swallowed by the earth. And the island of Atlantis, in like manner, sank beneath the sea and disappeared. Well, that, my friends, is very interesting stuff. Because what that is saying is that in like manner to what happened to them, right? Athens is here, and part of this is underwater, right? But there was a time when this water was much shallower. There was a time, we talked about it yesterday, when most of this light blue was probably visible. Now they're saying that there's a great deluge. That puts timing at one point. The timing that we get later puts it at another point. Oh, we'll deal with that as it comes up. But this deluge did not just sink Atlantis. It sank part of Athens. It sank the part of Athens where the men who were set apart for combat, the men who lived lives solely devoted to combat, and through their excellence in good governance, that's the part that sank beneath the sea. Right? The reconstitution of Athens after the deluge, and the first men and women of their lore who reconstituted Athens, they are just a shadow of the civilization that was there prior. They don't hold any of the memories, basically, of the times prior. Whereas down here, the deluge didn't happen. Over here, they had their normal cycle of the river flowed over, and we had our stuff from the river. Because that's what they have here. It's a big desert, right? And so the knowledge stored here is older than the knowledge known here. Sorry. All right, back to Timaeus. Now, Socrates. You have heard a shortened version of the account given by old Critias based on what Solon had heard. However, yesterday, when you were talking about the citizen body and the men you mentioned, I was amazed to be reminded of the very details I have recounted just now, as I realized that, miraculously, by some chance, your account was in broad agreement with what Solon had recounted. I was reluctant to say anything immediately because it was a long time ago and I did not remember the story well enough. So I decided that I would first need to recollect everything properly for myself and then tell the story. Accordingly, I quickly agreed to your assignments yesterday, being of the view that the biggest task in all such situations is to deliver a speech which fits the purpose, and that we were well equipped for this. So it was, as Hermocrates said, that as soon as I left here yesterday, I told these men the story I had remembered, and after I left them, I went back over it during the night and remembered almost everything. Well, I tell you, as the saying goes, the lessons of childhood have an amazing grip on the memory. In fact, I do not know if I would be able to recall the memory of everything I heard yesterday, and yet I would be completely surprised if any detail of that story, which I heard so long ago, has escaped me. I heard it with so much pleasure and delight at the time, and the old man taught it to me so enthusiastically because of my constant questioning that it has become like burnt in impressions of indelible writing abiding within me. And in fact, I recounted these very details to our friends here first thing this morning, so that they too would be well provided with stories to tell. So, Socrates, I am now ready to explain the reason why I have related all of this, not just in summary, but in detail, just as I heard it. We shall now transpose the citizens in the city which you described to us yesterday, as though it was a myth, to a true situation by locating that city here, as if it was this city, Athens. And those citizens whom do you imagine we would declare to be our true ancestors, whom the Egyptian priests described? Those two stories will harmonize completely, and we shall strike no discordant note in declaring that your citizens are the Athenians of ancient times. Working together, and with each taking a part, we shall all endeavor, as best we can, to present an appropriate response to the task you assigned us. Well then, Socrates, you must consider whether this story of ours accords with your intention, or we should look for another instead. Socrates, why, Critias, what story would we choose in preference to this one, when it's so especially appropriate to the festival of the goddess because of its connection to her, and the fact that it is no invented story, but a true account is all important, I presume. How and from we shall find alternatives if we let those go. It's impossible, so you must speak, and good luck with it, for I must now remain quiet and take a turn at listening, in contrast to my speaking role yesterday. Behold the order of the feast we have arranged for you, Socrates. It seemed to us that Timaeus should speak first, since he is the best astronomer among us, and has made it his principal task to understand the nature of the universe. He will begin with the creation of the cosmos, and conclude with the nature of human beings. After this, I shall proceed as if I had received human beings from Timaeus, created in his story, and from you, some who have been specially educated, and bring them before us as before judges, in accordance with Solon's account and his law, and make them citizens of this city of ours. Since they are, in fact, the ancient Athenians whose disappearance was revealed by the record of the ancient Egyptian writings. From then on, I shall tell the story as a story about Athenian citizens. Socrates, it seems that I am going to be repaid fully and magnificently with a feast of discourse. Apparently, it is your turn to speak next, Timaeus, once you have invoked the gods in the customary manner. Timaeus, well, Socrates, that is just what anyone with even a little sound-mindedness does before they embark on any undertaking, great or small. They always, I presume, call upon God. And we, who are somehow going to make speeches about the universe, how it has been generated, and whether it is actually ungenerated, if we are not to go entirely astray, must call upon the gods and goddesses and pray that everything be spoken acceptably to them in particular, and less importantly, to ourselves. Now, let that be our invocation to the gods, but we must also invoke that which is ours, so that you may learn easily, so I may expound my thoughts on the subjects before us as best I can. All right, so, me. This is one of those things that I had found on my own, right? This is one of those things that I did. Before I undertake anything, I seek wisdom first. Every single morning, as I make my walk, when I pray for you, my crew, every single day, and I pray for our world and its benefit every single day, and I pray for people I don't like every single day, I call upon and ask my God for wisdom so that I would not be misled, and for boldness to speak that which he would have me say, and to put in my mouth the words that he would have me say, and to hold back from me any words that he would not have me say. That is part of what I have been doing for well over what, we're on year 3 now. December 31st would actually make the full 3rd year. So it was 2019 when I started. And so this is one of those things. This is one of those things that it would have saved me a lot of time if I would have came across this a little bit sooner. Right? And that's just what I'm pointing out here. This is a very, very good practice to start. Before you undertake anything, you should stop and ask for God. Like besides what I do there, where I talk about it every single day. When I have a decision to make, I do it. This morning my wife's going. She's sitting today for the CPAM, the certified project assistant manager. And it's a fairly big deal, and she's a little bit nervous about it. And before she left this morning, we sat together and we prayed, because that's what you should do before you undertake anything. God first in all things, and if you're not standing for God first, you're not standing in the right spot. In my opinion, we must make this distinction first. What is it? What is that which is always and has no becoming? And what is that which is becoming but never is? Now, the former, being ever the same, is comprehended by the activity of nous, along with an account. That's spirit. The latter, by opinion, along with the sense perception devoid of an account. So, what is becoming and what is never is, right? And it says that becoming, would being the former, is the same as is comprehended by the activity of spirit or thought or yourself, along with the account or the life lived. And the latter of nothingness by opinion, along with the sense of perception devoid of account. So, nothing. And it comes into being and passes away and never actually is. Again, all that comes into being must come into being from some cause. 8 rules of creation. For it is impossible for anything to be generated without any cause. Now, whenever a craftsman looks to the unchanging, referring to something like this as his model, he will reproduce its form and character. And all he fashions in this way will be necessarily be beautiful. But if he looks to something that has come to be and use a generated model, the product will not be beautiful. What is that saying, right? How many of y'all out there remember what a Xerox machine is? You can make a copy. You could take an original work and you could place it on this glass screen. You close the lid and you hit the button and the little thing goes across it and you can get a copy. And it is a fairly accurate representation of the original. It is obviously not the original. There are defects that do not transfer. And so, if you take the copy and then make a copy of that, the defects amplify. You lose more material each time you make the copy. That's what is being said here. When you're using the example, someone had to come up with the original. There had to be an original first. And all the copies that we make are pale imitations from the original, no matter what work it is that we're talking about. And therefore, it cannot be as beautiful as the original. Now, there is something that which must be considered first about the entire heaven or cosmos. In fact, let's call it by whatever name it readily accepts. And this is the fundamental question that must be considered at the outset in relation to anything. Whether it always was, with no beginning in generation, or has come to be, having originated from some beginning. If it has come to be, for it is both visible, tangible, and it has a body, and all that such things are perceptible. and all perceptibles are grasped by opinion and the senses, and, as we saw, came into being and are generated. What's more, we say that a thing which has come to be has, of necessity, come to be through some cause. Now, to discover the maker and father of this universe is a task indeed, and having discovered him, it is impossible to describe him to everyone. And again, the fundamental question which must be considered is whether it had a beginning or not. I believe, in my personal opinion, that God said bang, right? That he began through his wisdom and through his power, which is beyond my comprehension, all the things that are. So I take it that it came from somewhere and was created fundamentally by something and did not merely just exist. That's me. You're free to disagree with me. I'm willing to listen to any arguments that make sense. Oh. But it is also saying that everything has to come from something, and that is one of the laws of creation. All things come from something because matter can neither be created nor destroyed. All things must come from something. There has to be something. And there has to be an energy invested in it for the transformation to happen. There is no idle transformation. So if I have something combustible and I'm holding it in my hand, unless I act upon it with an outside force to bring extra energy in, it will remain that way. Right? That is a fundamental law of creation. That is one of the 8 laws that I have listed. That's what's being said right here. In any case, there's a question we must consider once more in relation to the universe, with respect to which of the models did its artificer fashion it. Was it with respect to that which remains the same and unchanging, or with respect to a generated model? If, indeed, this cosmos is beautiful, and the craftsman is good, clearly he looked towards the everlasting. Otherwise, if that's not the case, and no one may legitimately say this, then he looked towards a model which has come to be. It is obvious to everyone that the model was everlasting, since the universe is the most beautiful of created things, and the craftsman is the most excellent of causes. So, having come into being in this way, it has been made to resemble that which is comprehended by reason and intelligence, and remains the same. Furthermore, since this is the case, it is entirely necessary that this universe be an image of something. Now, on the subject, it is most important to begin at the natural beginning. So there is a distinction we must make in relation to an image and its model. Accounts are also akin to the very subjects they expound. So, accounts of something stable and certain and discernible by nous or spirit will be fixed and unchanging. And such accounts must be irrefutable and incontrovertible, and insofar as this is possible and appropriate for verbal accounts, they should not fall short of this. However, accounts of something copied from that model, something which is therefore a likeness, are likely accounts, and stand in relation to other accounts, as being is to becoming, so too is truth to belief. Therefore, don't be surprised, Socrates, if, in many cases on numerous subjects, such as the gods or the creation of the universe, we prove unable to furnish accounts that are entirely and in every way consistent with themselves and exact. Indeed, if we can offer an account that is as likely as any other, we should be content, remembering that I who speak and you who judge possess a human nature, and so, except in the likely story about these matters, it is appropriate to seek nothing beyond that. What this is saying is that there is truth and there is what we perceive. Now, sometimes those things can get really close to overlapping, but it is almost impossible for them to coexist in the exact same location. They can be real close, they can touch each other. But the fact is that you are human and you are therefore fallible. I am human and I am definitely fallible. And so my understanding of anything cannot, as a human, be the complete knowledge of God. But if I find something that works for me to find God, then that should be enough for everyone. So if you are Christian and you believe that Jesus died on the cross for you and that is enough for you, then you can live by that. And if you are a Muslim and you live by the pillars of Islam and you live that and you die that, you're perfectly both fine. If you have questions in either one of those and you don't live that, then you have problems. If you're unaware of what I am doing, I have a Bible study going on, and I deal very much with this idea of we were given this one thing and it is how we are supposed to be unequivocally, and that has simply never been true. We see here where they are discussing the fact that the universe is ever changing, and because it is ever changing, our experience in it is ever changing along with it. And because of that, there is no ideal that can be held. There is no singular moment in time that can be described as man lives the perfection of. Not since the fall from heaven, and never again until heaven is reclaimed in the other side of the toroid that is existence. And so when you find something with which you are reasonably satisfied with seeking God's face in, then you should do that with all of your heart. And you should be satisfied with not seeking any further. But it is within your justification, if you want further knowledge, to seek it. And furthermore, it should not be withheld from you. Socrates. Excellent, Timaeus. Indeed. As you say, we must accept it unreservedly. We have enthusiastically accepted the prelude from you. In wonder, so please proceed now to the main theme. Let's see where we're at on time. Okay, we're good. Well, let us state the reason why becoming in the universe were constructed by the artificer. He was good, and in the good no envy ever arises about anything. And, being devoid of envy, he desired that all things be as much like himself as possible. We would then be absolutely right to accept from men of understanding that this is the supreme source of becoming and of the cosmos. For God desired that all be good, and as far as possible, nothing be imperfect. He therefore took everything that was visible, which was not at rest, but moving discordantly and randomly, and led it from disorder to order, regarding order as the entirely superior to disorder. But it was not then, nor is it now, lawful for the supreme good to enact anything except the supremely beautiful. So, on reflection, he discovered that from whatever is visible by nature, nothing that is made without spirit is, on the whole, ever better than something which possesses spirit. And furthermore, that spirit cannot be present in anything in the absence of soul. Based on this reflection, then spirit is thought, right? It is the consciousness. So spirit and body, spirit and soul, they're closely related but not exactly described as the same thing. Based on this reflection, having placed spirit in soul and soul in body, he constructed a universe, that's threefold by the way, and constructed the universe so that, once completed, it would naturally be as beautiful and as excellent a piece of work as possible. Accordingly, based upon the likely account, we must state that this cosmos is a living creature with soul and spirit that has, in truth, come into being through the providence of God. Spirit, soul, and body. What's the difference, right? Spirit is your consciousness on this plane. The soul is the eternal vessel that holds the consciousness inside the body, which is the flesh suit. It is three separate things all in one thing. It is three in one. The spirit, the consciousness, the thought, the Holy Spirit, the consciousness, the thought, is held within the vessel of the soul, which is sent in a manner, right? It is part of the everlasting divinity of God, and it is spun out as a unique thing. And that unique thing comes here to have experiences, and I think we're going to get into that in a minute, but that is the difference between the spirit, body, and soul. It's easy to think of spirit and soul as the same, but they're not. The soul contains your conscious thought. It's like the vessel that holds the water. It's the cup. The water is the spirit that fills the cup. Right? Now, the cup is inside the meat suit. Right? It animates everything. It's what transforms the food we eat into the energy we need. It's the transitionary tool that is the divine spark inside of all of us. It is the thing that transmutes within you. All right, I'm pretty sure that it gets into the next part I wanted to talk about in a minute, so we're going to go ahead and let him talk first. Have we been right to speak of one single universe, or is it more correct to refer to many? Indeed, an infinite number. If in fact it is to be made in accordance with the model, there will be one, for that which encompasses all living creatures, discernible by spirit, would never not be one of a pair. If it were so, an additional living being would be needed to embrace both of these, and the two would be parts of this living thing. And it would then be more correct to say that the cosmos resembles not the two creatures, but the creature which contains them both. Therefore, so that it would resemble the all-perfect creature in respect to its uniqueness, the Maker accordingly did not make two or infinitely many cosmoi. Rather, this only begotten heaven has come into existence, and it is one, and one it shall be hereafter. And here's where my cosmology differs a little bit from theirs. I believe in the multiverse. In the extent of, right? Let me explain my multiverse. Every single second of your life is a possibility. As I am speaking to you right now, there is a possibility that somebody will walk through that door. There is a possibility that an asteroid will fall from the sky. There is a possibility that a flood will come, or an earthquake will shatter everything. There is a possibility that nothing will happen, and I will continue on. Every single one of those possibilities happens every single second. Now, the part that you are actively in is your part of your timeline. It is your timeline. You each, every single one, have been given a specific timeline. And on your timeline, your path is up to you. And so I can choose to finish this video, or I can choose to turn it off and go. And if I choose to do the rest of the video, one sequence of events goes on. And if I choose to stop it, then another sequence of events takes on. And Since I am choosing to continue the video, the results from this video is the path that I am on. But there is an existence where I turn this video off right now, and y'all never heard from me again. And that is going off in that direction. But because I made the choice to stay here, this is my timeline. And on that timeline, I am now an NPC in somebody else's life. There are people that you meet every day whose timelines do not align with yours. You are not on the same path, even though if you interact, you are to learn lessons from each other. But if your timelines are not aligned, then they are an NPC and they have a part to play in your life, but they are not there for your party. They're not part of who you are going forward. Your spouse, hopefully, is aligned to your timeline. And so they become part of your party. And you together share a timeline, at least in part. But all of your spouse's coworkers are NPCs to you. They're non-player characters. They're not part of your timeline. And so that's where my cosmology takes a difference, right? Because this time, like theirs is, everybody has the same timeline and everybody's on the same path. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that God, the reason for existence, here it is, y'all. This is the big reveal. Y'all want to hear it? The entire reason for existence is the struggle. And for the variety of the experience that we each have. And because I am choosing to finish this video and to share with y'all my thoughts on what the existence comes from, I get to live down this path. And I have control of that, right? That is my timeline. And so because I have control of that timeline and I have people aligned with me in my timeline, we agree to this timeline and go. God gets to experience what I have chosen in this timeline. But because I didn't choose the path that went the other way, because I didn't choose to stop and to not do, because I didn't choose that, God doesn't experience that. Well, I think that because we're here for the experience, that's no longer our path, but God still experiences that. And somewheres on a different timeline that is completely different from mine, right? There's a completely different ruler in place, right? It was necessary for me to make the choice not to share this with you. But on my timeline, the one that I am calling into existence, I hold responsibility. And the responsibility, as small as it is now, is to make sure that I am relaying to you as truthfully as I can my understanding of things. And because of that, you can choose to align with my timeline, or you can grab hold of your own timeline and forge your own path. The choice is yours, and the experience is yours. But the other things get to happen too. One more quick example of this before we move on through the text. And I have relayed my story in other places, and this is a little heavy for a Plato talk, but when I was a child, I was molested. And that's heavy for some people, right? I get that, and I apologize. And if you don't want to listen any farther, I get that. But part of life is the choices that we make. And I believe that before we were here, we were somewheres, because the spirit is eternal. The soul is not finite, but rather that which has been created. Like nothing gets created from nothing. So my soul came from somewheres. And I believe that before I incarnated into this existence on this timeline, I talked to everyone ever that I will ever meet. In the singular existence of time, right? We all agreed to teach each other various lessons. And me and this particular person agreed that I would be a temptation to him. And that if he had chosen one part of the timeline, we would have went in a different direction than the one we went in. And y'all probably never would have seen my face. But because he chose that direction in the timeline, which was terrible, right? It's a terrible experience. Nobody should ever have to experience it, but God needed to experience that. And that's a rough one for some people. And I understand that if that's like what, but how could God ever experience that pain if not through us? And sometimes that is the entire reason for the pain. So that the whole, he who created all things, can experience somehow a tiny mortal bit of life because he is immortal. What is pain to him? What is loss to him? And so he experiences that through us. And so there could have been a different set of choices, and we could have both been on a different timeline. And maybe I chose this particular timeline in particular because I needed to talk to y'all and to change your life. That is how I view things. That is literally how my mind works. And I'm trying to do the best good that I possibly can. And on this timeline, I am trying to make the best choices that I can. And I'm trying to relay to others the fact that sometimes other people do make pretty terrible choices. And that sometimes the pain that you feel is not because of your choices, but you have always, on a some level, in my opinion, chosen that pain to experience because the point of life is the experience. If there was no change, there would be no need for the model, to bring it back to the study that we're in. Now whatever has come to be must have bodily form and be visible and tangible. But nothing could ever become visible without fire, or tangible without something solid, or solid without earth. Hence, as he began to construct the body of the universe, God made it from fire and earth. Now, it is not possible for two things to be combined well on their own without a third, for some bond is required between the two to draw them together. The very best bond is that which, in much as possible, makes itself and the conjoined entities one. And it is the proportion that, by nature, best accomplishes this. So, whenever the middle item of three numbers or volumes or powers is such that the first is to the middle as the middle is to the last, and again, that the last is to the middle as the middle is to the first, then the middle becomes first and last, and the last and first, for their part, both become middles. Accordingly, it follows of necessity that they all turn out to be the same. And since they have all become the same as one another, they will all be one. We have talked before in other places about the golden mean and about the doubling effect and the various distributions and all of the things that sacred geometry holds, and I am by no means a master of. I have drawn for myself Metatron's cube. I have for myself experienced and played with sacred geometry, but not to the level that these men understood it. What is being talked about here is principles of sacred geometry, of which I am not an initiate, right? I have dabbled on the fringes, but I have never delved into the depths. So I don't know on that level. But as we go through this, there are other talks that are going to deal deeper with sacred geometry. And I'm going to attempt to recreate some of the talks in the 3D modeling program that I use, Blender, and so that we can visually see it represented step by step in a 3D atmosphere, what Metatron's cube is actually supposed to be. That's a good thing. And so I'm not going to try to deep dive into any of the sacred geometry now. That is going to leave a fairly large void in the formation of the universe. But there is a whole nother paper on that, a whole nother talk of Plato on that that deals specifically with that. So forgive me for that now. We will get to it eventually. All right. So then, if the body of the universe had to come together into being, having surface but no depth, a single mean would have sufficed to bind all of its constituents together with itself. But now, since it has a solid structure and solids are never conjoined by one middle term, but by two, God therefore placed water and air between fire and earth. And, insofar as it was possible, he arranged that they have the same proportion to one another, so that as fire is to air, air is to water, and air is to water, water is to earth. That is not a 1-to-1 ratio. It is a proportional ratio, which we will deal with at another time. These he bound together and constructed a visible and tangible heaven. And for these reasons, and from such constituents as these, 4 in number, the body of the cosmos was generated, having been harmonized by proportion and endowed from these with affection, so that having come to sameness with itself, it was rendered indissoluble by anyone except he who can join it. So no one but God can take it apart. Play with that, Einstein. And now the construction of the cosmos actually consumed each one of these 4 elements entirely. For the artificer constructed it from all the fire and water, and also the air and earth, and not one part or power of any being left outside of it. He decided this for the following reasons. Firstly, so that it would be as whole and perfect a living being as possible, made from perfect parts. In addition to this, it was to be one, since there would be nothing left over from which something else of its kind could be generated. It was also to be free from old age and disease, as he realized that if a composite body is surrounded by heat or cold, or any forces outside it, they attack it and bring it to an untimely end. And by inducing disease and old age, they make it waste away. So, for this reason, and based upon this consideration, he fashioned it whole, composed of all these wholes, one perfect, ageless, and incorruptible. And he gave a shape to it that was appropriate and belonged to its nature, the shape which contains all other shapes within itself, was appropriate for the living being that is going to embrace all other living beings within itself. So he turned it to make it circular, a spherical shape, having all of its extremities equidistant from its center. This is the most perfect of all shapes, and the one most uniform within itself. And uniformity he regarded as infinitely better than non-uniformity, and he polished it all smooth and round on the outside for many reasons. It had no need of eyes, for there was nothing to be seen outside it, nor hearing, for there was nothing to be heard. There was no air around it for which it needed to breathe, nor did it require any organ by which it might receive food into itself, or, indeed, expel it again once it had been digested. In fact, nothing went out or came in from anywheres, for there was nothing. Indeed, it was contrived by design so as to provide its own food from its own waste, and to experience everything within itself, and enact everything by itself, because he who had assembled it thought it would be better for it to be independent rather than being dependent on others. He did not think it necessary to attach hands to it when they would not need it to grasp with, or to ward off anything, nor feet, either to support nor to stand upon. For he assigned it movement, unnatural to its body, the most reasonable and intelligent of the seven kinds of motion. Accordingly, he caused it to move by revolving in a circle, leading around in the same way, in the same place within itself. He took all the other six motions away and fashioned it without their wanderings. Seeing that it did not need feet for this circular motion, he brought it forth without legs or feet. All right, so what are we talking about here? Are we talking about the planet? That's the easiest way to look at it. But there are things to look at outside of the planet. There are things fixed into the heavens, so we're talking about the entirety of the universe. And so it is here a sphere. A sphere in rotation. Now, I'm not sure if they get to it, but I hold a somewhat slightly different belief, if you could venture so far. I believe that there is a toroidal shape to the universe, that it feeds itself is a key, that this movement is at both times in and out and back and forth and around all together at once into one, so that the movement of the toroid is all seven movements encapsulated, so that six seem to be removed. That is my interpretation. I could be wrong. It could simply be the same as us spinning in space around the sun and our globe surrounded in crystalline firmament separating us from the other, right? It could be that, but it seems to be the entirety of everything. And in my opinion, all things are toroids. This was the entire thinking of the God who is always, about the God that was soon to be. And based on this thinking, he made it smooth and uniform, a complete perfect body, composed of perfect bodies, everywhere's equal from the center. Again, that would give me a toroid. He placed soul in the middle of it and stretched it through the entire body. He even covered the outside of the body with it and established one single solitary round heaven revolving in a circle. It was able, because of its excellence, to interact with itself, having no need of any other, as it was acquaintance and friend enough to itself. For all of these reasons, what he created was a blessed God. But although we are now endeavoring to speak of the soul after our description of the body, God did not accordingly contrive that the soul be younger. For when he combined them, he would not have allowed the elder to be ruled by the younger. But we, accustomed with our accustomed degree of casualness, speak on in this somewhat random fashion, but in fact, he constructed the soul to be elder and prior to the body in birth, and in excellence, its mistress and ruler. You are to take command of your timeline. He made the soul from the following constituents in this manner: from being that is undivided and ever the same, and being which by contrast comes into existence apportioned to bodies. He formed a third, intermediate form of being from both of them. Next, he mixed the nature of same and other in like manner, making a third, intermediate form between their undivided form and their form as apportioned to bodies. He then took these three mixtures and mixed them all into one, three into one. And, as the nature of other was difficult to mix, he blended it with same by force. Then, having mixed this with the help of being and made one from three, he apportioned this whole once more into as many parts as fitting, each part being a mixture of same, other, and being. Soul, body, and spirit. And he began to divide it as follows. First, he separated one part from the entire, and after this he separated a double part the first. The next a third, which was 1.5 times the second, and 3 times the first. A fourth part, double the second. A fifth, 3 times the third. A sixth, 8 times the first, and a seventh, 27 times the first. This is the cubing the, or I forget which one it is. It's not cubing the circle, but it is the progression of life through the spiral of creation, right? It is the Fibonacci sequence. That's the one now. And again, we'll get into that in sacred geometry. And after this, he filled up the doubles and triple intervals, cutting off further intersections of the mixture and placing these in between them, so that each interval there were 2 means, one exceeding its extremes and be exceeded by them in the same portions, and the other one exceeding the extreme and be exceeded by the other in an equal number. These connections give rise to the intervals of 3 seconds, 4 thirds, 9 eighths. Between the previous intervals, all the 4 thirds intervals were filled up by the 9 eighth intervals, leaving a portion of each of them. And an interval associated with this remaining portion had the numerical relation 256 254ths. What's more, the mixture from these were cut at that stage, entirely used up in the process. He then cut this entire compound along its length in 2, and situated the middles of each together like the letter X, and bent each into a circle, and attached each to itself, and to the other one at the point opposite where they overlap. Included them in that kind of motion which turns around uniformly in the same place, and made one of the circles inner and the other outer. The outer movement he designated as the movement of same, and the inner as the movement of other. He kept the movement of same revolving and to the right, and the other diagonally and to the left. And he granted supremacy to the movement of same and similar, for he left it single and undivided. However, he divided the inner circle 6 times, producing 7 circles based on the double and triple intervals. There being 3 of each, he commanded the circles to go in opposite directions of one another, 3 at similar speeds, 4 at dissimilar speeds to one another, and to the other 3, but their movements were proportional. This is describing the heavens. It's describing the helix of the DNA. It's describing the rotation of the sun and the moon and the stars, and it is describing the rotation of the antibodies in your body. And when the entire construction of the soul had been completed in accordance with the reasoning of the one who constructed it, he then fashioned within it all that his bodily form, and having brought both together, fastened them center to center, and soul to soul, being woven entirely throughout the heaven, from center to extremity, enfolding it in a complete circle on the outside, and revolving in herself, initiated a divine being of unceasing and intelligent life for all time. Now, while the body of heaven is indeed visible, soul for its part is invisible, partaking of reason and harmony, and the best of created things, created by the very best of all, that is known by spirit and is being. Okay, let's see where we're at on time. That's probably going to be the wrap up for today. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and wrap this one up. We're going to get into the nature of the soul next, where we have been talking the nature of creation. This will be talking more of a soul and then, or spirit and then soul. So we're going to deal with that in a separate topic. This is the creation of the universe. This is the creation of the bodies. This is the creation and the setting of tone for the mathematics of creation. Now, to these people, mathematics is the key to life, and they are not wrong. I do not have the great depth of knowledge that they did on math. It's a lacking of mine. Like when I could do algebra. Algebra was no problem. Geometry, I hated it. For some reason, I never wanted to do it, and so I resisted it. Algebra was no problem. Geometry was probably because there's so much SI involved in that. And so I've never studied sacred geometry in the manner that I should. And so as part of this, we are going to do that together. We are going to learn things together. I have nibbled on the fringes. I have never delved deep. And so we will do that together. This is an explanation of creation. Once you have had a meditative experience of the creative experience, which is a thing, this becomes even more clear than it is. And so that is something that I would encourage you to try for yourself, right? It involves self-discipline and meditation and aligning all of the things, but you can do it. And so this, as described, I don't have exception with except where I've noted my exceptions, right? I have dissimilar thoughts in some places for many different things. Many different people would disagree with me, and that is perfectly fine. We all have our own spirit. We are all here on our own separate journey. We all have our own lessons to learn. Some of those lessons are awesome, and some of those lessons are terrible, but they are our lessons. We're supposed to take those lessons and learn from them and become better. That is always the point of the lesson. Become better on the other side of it. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat complicated topic and somewhat fun to people who are a little bit nerdy like me. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. If you like what I'm doing here, let me know. Hit the bells and the whistles down below. I don't like doing self-promotion, so I'm going to cut it short. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You're perfect, only complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit Steak. Peace.